Cek satu, cek satu. distinguished presenters, moderator, participants, depending on where you are joining us from, good afternoon from Bogor, Indonesia. Welcome to the second day of our workshop, Gap Analysis on Food Loss and Waste Indices. Yesterday, we finished our workshop day one in a very good shape. This workshop could become a great opportunity for sharing insights and practical knowledge from G20 member countries on a range of critical challenges in reducing food loss and waste. To this, once again, we would like to express our great appreciation to our international partners from FAO, UNEP, and OECD who supports us in preparing this workshop. Distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, I am Sahat Pasaribu, your host for today. Allow me to greet our colleagues from FAO, UNEP, and OECD, our moderator, Mr. Richard Swannell of Waste and Resource Action Program, UK, and all distinguished speakers for day two. Dr. Medrizam of Bappenas, Indonesia, Dr. Gustavo Porpino de Araujo of Brazilian Agricultural Research Institute, Embrapa, and Ms. Clementine O'Connor of UNEP. Before we start, allow me to inform you our program for today. The first program is the workshop session, led by our moderator, and the second is the wrap-up and closing session, led by the host. In between, we will have a photo session. We will hold this workshop in plenary format for 1 hour, followed by a discussion or question and answer for about 40 minutes. Before we start, allow me to remind the participants to please use the chat box for questions. Once again, use the chat box for questions. And for moderator and speakers, you can monitor the questions in the chat box. Without further ado, we will have Dr. Richard Swannell to share the general context of this workshop and as well as chair this session. But before that, let me read Mr. Swannell's short bios. Dr. Richard Swannell, International Director, RAP, is the environmental scientist with a strong track record of leading teams which tackle plastic pollution, reduce food waste, and deliver more sustainable practices within businesses. He leads RAP's international work, working with partners in over 40 countries to deliver systemic change, particularly within the food system. RAP is a non-for-profit organization based in the UK, which aims to tackle climate change and cut waste around the world. Dr. Richard Swannell, the screen is yours, and please chair the session.
Thank you, Sahat, and thank you very much for that extremely kind introduction. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today and to be moderating such an impressive panel. As Sahat has said, I'm going to just set the scene for this, talking about the case for action on food loss and waste. And just to sort of make sure that we focus the discussion in the important area. And just to reiterate Sahat's point, if you have any questions, please put them into the chat box and we'll address them as we go through. So the case for action on food loss and waste. As many of you already know, for around every 2 tons of food that we eat on the planet, another ton is lost or wasted. That means around 1/3 of all the food that is produced is wasted around the world. And just to give you an idea, we need the area the size of China to actually produce the food that is thrown away every single year and is lost and wasted around the world. And that has significant environmental, social, and financial consequences. So financially, this is estimated to be well over $1 trillion every single year. And that's more than 10 times the turnover of the world's biggest food company, Nestle. The environmental consequences are significant. Food loss and waste makes up between 8 and 10% of global greenhouse gas emissions, which, to put into context, if food waste was a country, and of course it would be a pretty unpleasant country with huge piles of food waste around, but if it was a country, it would be the third biggest emitter on the planet behind China and the USA. And so that is a huge responsibility for greenhouse gas emissions on the planet. And this is against the social backdrop, which currently 1 in 9 go hungry every single day. And the predictions for that is that that's only going to get worse given the food crisis that we're currently all facing. And that food crisis is particularly acute. And taking some data from FAO, the commodity prices have grown 30% in the last year. And in February to March alone, food prices increased by 12%, a staggering amount in 1 month. And prices this year have already hit an all-time high, a new all-time high for food prices, which means that tackling food loss and waste is even more of a priority in this context. And if we do tackle food loss and waste, actually this can have a big impact on greenhouse gas emissions. So the Project Drawdown report has looked at a scenario of reducing food loss and waste and found it to be in the top 3 most impactful strategies, by some measures the most impactful strategy in terms of tackling food loss and waste of all the strategies that they reviewed. So this can be a potent way of not only reducing costs around the world, but reducing greenhouse gas emissions and reducing environmental impact. But the other thing is this actually worth doing from a business perspective? What's the return on investment on food loss and waste reduction activity? So with WRI, we looked at 1,200 sites around the world in 700 countries, in 17 countries, including Indonesia. And we found that the median return on investment for every $1 invested, you got companies were getting $14 of financial benefit back. So this does work. This does give a substantial financial benefit once businesses actually do it, which begs the question, why aren't businesses actually already prioritizing food loss and waste reduction? And I think there's 2 answers to that. One is the actual amount of food waste is not regularly measured by businesses. It's not, the operational measurement of food loss and waste is relatively rare around the world. And so they don't have a precise number on exactly how much food is wasted. The second reason is that most businesses look at the disposal costs of food waste, which is the only visible cost to them. That is the cost often in many countries of taking the food into landfill. Now that cost is only the disposal cost. It doesn't take into account the material cost, the energy cost, the lost labor, the lost water, all the costs in actually producing the food in the first place that then is subsequently wasted. When you take that into account, the true cost of wasted materials is often 10 times, sometimes more than that, times the disposal. And so once businesses measure and understand the true cost of food loss and waste, then they often act upon it. But the critical thing is there is a very strong business case for action. So what works in actually reducing food loss and waste? Well, one area that RAP has been working with partners around the world is public-private partnerships. They can help reduce food waste. So that is governments and businesses right across the supply chain. So retailers, manufacturers, hotels, restaurants, all working together to actually set a clear target for everybody working towards that target. And that target is often the Sustainable Development Goal target 12.3 of halving food waste and reducing food loss by 2030. And then committing to measure food loss and waste. So in our theory of change, once businesses start to measure food loss and waste, and indeed, once people are aware of how much it is, then they start acting upon it. So critically, getting businesses to operationalize food waste, measurement of food waste, and then to monitor and report that progress confidentially, if necessary, so that we have an idea of how every business is within the public-private partnership is progressing towards that goal. And then to act based on those evidence. So once you know how much food is wasted, how much it's costing businesses, then implement practices and programs and policies to help reduce that food loss and waste. So practices within businesses, working within their own operations in the start, but then also working with their customers and their suppliers to help them reduce food loss and waste. And the governments, as part of these projects, are often looking at policies that facilitate the food loss and waste reduction. And one of the ways this has worked, for example, in the UK and in a number of countries around the world, is integrating this with a behavior change campaign, Love Food, Hate Waste, to help citizens reduce food waste in the home. And just to give you an idea of one such voluntary agreement, this is the Courtauld Commitment in the UK, and this has signatories right across the supply chain. And actually, is the membership of the scheme actually accounts for something of the order of about 80 to 85% of total food sales within the UK. Now, to give you an idea, therefore, of how this operates, so once you measure, you can then make up a pattern across the whole supply chain. So this is a story of 100 potatoes, which shows that there's a small amount of loss in the field. Of 2, 9 are lost in grading, 3 are lost in storage, but 17 are lost in packaging and transport. 9 are spoiled in the kitchen before they could use. 20 are lost actually in preparation. And this means that they weren't very good at converting potatoes actually into food. And then 15 were left on the plate. Now, it's not the numbers that are critical here, it's the analysis, because by going right across the supply chain, using measurement to target the hotspots, that gives the ability of the voluntary agreement and the businesses as part of that public-private partnership, they can act where they can have the biggest impact. So in this particular case, packing and transport, or preparation, or indeed getting portion sizes right so as to help people eat the right amount. So what impact has this particular public-private partnership and the behaviour change campaign, Love Food, Hate Waste, that goes with it, what's that been in the UK? Well, it's helped the UK reduce its food loss and waste by 27% from farm gate to the home, 27% less per capita, which is a 1.7 million tonnes per year less food, saving around $6 billion per year in terms of the food not being wasted. And that's also having a substantial effect on avoiding greenhouse gas emissions. And to be more specific, we've seen a big impact in the households with a 31% less food waste per capita per household. So this approach can actually drive significant change. And this approach is now being used more widely around the world. So food waste public-private partnerships are now increasingly being used across Europe, the European community. The European Union has got a strong target of helping deliver SDG 12.3 by 2030, and there's a number of voluntary agreements across there. But we're also seeing this being used in the US and Canada, in Mexico, Pacto por la Comida, in South Africa, and in Indonesia with GRAS 2030 and the Australian Food Pact in Australia. So we're beginning to see this approach being widely replicated around the world. So just as in line with what Sahat was saying about the purposes of this event, where are the gaps, in my view, that's holding us back? Well, data is always a gap. More food waste, data on food waste in homes and businesses in more countries, and more businesses measuring, so that we have a better set of data. And I'm sure the speakers will actually say more about that. Clarity on the costs of food waste in more countries, so that people are really aware of the true costs of food waste in all the countries, and the G20 could take a lead in this particular space, and more data on successful policy interventions. And again, there's some great examples across the G20, which could also serve as an opportunity to show leadership on how this can be driven around the world. So in just drawing this introduction to an end, in conclusion, I think the case for investing in food loss and waste reduction is compelling because it saves money, it reduces greenhouse gas emissions, and indeed other environmental impacts across the world, reduce food waste going into landfill, for example, and indeed reduce water use, reduce pressures on the land around the world. And it improves food availability, which, given the food crisis we all face, is absolutely key. And the return on investment is significant. The benefits are substantial. So I think it's ripe for the rapid scale up in investment, and ripe for an opportunity for the G20 to take a leadership role in this space. Thank you very much for your attention. And so it's now my pleasure to introduce the first speaker of the panel. Dr. Medrilzam is currently the Director of Environmental Affairs in the Ministry of National Development and Planning, Bappenas. He has been serving in Bappenas since 1993 and has been appointed in various structural and functional positions since then. As Bappenas's representative, Medrilzam had chaired the Indonesian delegation in financial climate change negotiations under the UNFCCC from 2005 to 2008, and actively involved in several international loan and grant negotiations between Indonesia and several bilateral countries and multilateral agencies. He is one of Indonesia's leading experts on food, on forest, climate financing, carbon policy, environmental issues, as well as system dynamics and spatial dynamics modeling, and wrote many publications and official documents regarding these areas. He received his bachelor's degree in environmental engineering from Bandung Institute of Technology in 1992 and holds a master's degree in professional economics. And further, he holds a PhD in environmental management from the University of Queensland in Australia. An impressive CV. It's delighted to have you on the panel today. Over to you, Dr. Mujal Zam.
Well, thank you very much, Richard, for a very, very wonderful introductions and also a very insightful information on the RAP experience. In this occasion, of course, I would like to thank for the organizing committee for inviting me to share Indonesian experience and also strategy on the food loss and waste in Indonesia. And I have to admit that basically the issue on food loss and waste in Indonesia basically is a kind of a new issue that we have just bring on the table in the context of policy discourses in Indonesia. And it is a very good time. Basically, we try to bring this issue on the table because this is very in line with a lot of current and very important issues that we have to face. There is a food crisis there, and also emissions, climate crisis, and so on and so forth. So let me begin my brief explanations on the food loss and waste management strategy in Indonesia. And next, please. I would like to inform you that all the audience here that basically, if we look at our waste compositions in Indonesia, well, we have found out that about 40.3% of our waste compositions basically comes from our foods. That's a food waste composition in our waste. So according to one study, global study, Indonesia has been claimed in 2016 that we have produced 300 kilos per person per year in the context of food loss and waste. So this is a very huge number, and we have been claimed as the second largest in the world that produced food loss and waste per capita per year. Basically, we in the next slides, I think we would like to show the latest study that we have already done, and basically we corrected the numbers, but let's see later. But still, we have seen that this is very ironic. You know, we waste our foods quite significantly large, but on the other side, 8.5% of Indonesia populations is actually lack of food, and these numbers slightly increased from 20 to 2021, about 0.15%. And then also Indonesia is ranked rank 65 out of 113 countries in terms of Global Food Security Index. This is the lowest among other ASEAN countries based on our reference here. And certainly, since this become a big issue for Indonesia now, since we have already brought this issue on the table of our policy discourses, we try also to align our policy and strategy in the government with our SDG goals, indicators 12.3. And this is strictly related food loss and waste effort to reduce the food loss and waste effort. And in our SDGs, at least we have already identified that the efforts to reduce the food loss and waste at least involve 8 other goals in the SDG. So this is not we, of course, when we try to implement some policies to reduce the food loss and waste, we cannot be just in a silo mode. We have to work together with other partners, other goals as well in the SDGs. Next. Yes, this is the data that we have already comes from our study just recently. Basically, we corrected the data that the Economic Intelligence Unit have produced at the global level. Basically, our food loss and waste increased quite significantly from 2000 to 2019. it increased from 115 to 184 kilogram per capita per year. And if you look at the compositions between the productions, poor harvest and storage, processing and packaging, distributions and retail, and also consumptions, as you can see in the bar chart, the compositions of the distributions and in particular on the consumptions, it increased quite significantly from 2000 to 2019. So right now, the consumption states create a lot of contributions to the food loss and waste numbers in total. And this, and also if we look at again based on the food sectors and types, basically the biggest food loss waste generation actually come from food crops, particularly on cereals. And if you look at again, the most inefficient food sector and category is actually in the horticulture plants, especially in vegetables. As Richard has already mentioned, this has created a very negative impact on economy, social, and also environment. We have also already measured the economic impact of this very, very large, about 4 to 5% of our GDP. And in terms of social impact, well, if we compare the loss to the potential of energy content that we can recover, this could recover about 62 to 100% of Indonesian populations. And if we compare it to the protein content to fulfill the Indonesians' needs, so this could also reach about 91 to 100% of Indonesians' populations on the protein content that we have to meet. So this is very big numbers, and if you look at again the environmental impact compared to the emissions, for example, this the emissions from the food loss and waste is about 7.3% of our total greenhouse gas emissions. So this is a big number, and this is a big loss if we just don't do anything about this food loss and waste. Next. Next. Yeah. We have tried to identify what sort of causes and drivers that actually causing that makes all this food loss and waste become very, very big. And then we try to identify some strategy and some targets as well. So actually there are 5 main causes and drivers. First, lack of good handling practices. The second one about insufficient of quality storage. Quality of storage is very crucial in terms of the supply chains and the food loss aspect. Market quality standards and consumer preference. This is also very crucial. Lack of information and education for food workers and consumers. And this is the fifth. This is also very crucial about access portions and consumers' behavior. Well, in Indonesia, sometimes the cultures also create some access portions and consumer behavior. Sometimes if we just look at our plates, it's not full. Well, we can say that, well, we do not eat sufficient or quite enough. So usually we put big portions in our plates, but then we do not finish it. Then we throw away some part of the foods that we left. So that's create a lot of food waste then. Based on our projections, if we don't do something, so our food loss and waste per capita will increase to 344 kilograms per capita per year in 2045. 2045 is 100 years of our independence. So we would like to see that everything has to be much, much better compared today. So we don't want to be trapped in this number. So we try to develop some policy and strategy, including some behavioral change activities, improving food support systems, strengthening regulations, utilizing food loss and waste itself, and also least but not least, the data collection and also food loss and waste study need to be strengthened in the future. So we, based on some modeling exercise, we've done some system dynamic modelings on this exercise. We try to reach then about 166 kilogram per capita per year in 2045. This is still a big numbers, but of course, we cannot be to be very, very ambitious. We need to be realistic. But well, according to this policy and strategy, this is the numbers that we can reach in the future. Next, please. Yeah, and of course we have to do. The government cannot do do it alone. In the government side, we line ministries actually right now are working together to handling these issues. We're from planning ministries. Of course, we try to do some kind of exercise in terms of policies, in terms of strategy, and of course, we work together very closely with colleagues from Ministry of Agriculture, National Food Agencies, Ministry of Environment and Forestry, even Ministry of Public Works and Housing, and even there are several others line ministries that right now are very interested and willing to share their portfolio to improve the situations. In the non-state actors, right now there have been some movements, for example, like the food bank programs that have been initiated by colleagues from non-state actors. Here there are some numbers, some food banks activities that we have shown on the map. And this is just an initial works. And we really expect that later this can be enhanced, spread out throughout Indonesia. And of course, we will be working together very closely with the non-state actors colleagues as well. Next. And with regard to the G20, I believe we really expect that the food loss and waste can also be promoted. And since we are talking in the agriculture working group here under the G20, and I believe we try to bring this food loss and waste management aspect into part of the decisions of the G20 decision under the agriculture working group. But of course, we have to align these decisions as well with other working groups. And I'm part of the development working group. Basically, in the development working group, we push very stronger to bring the green and blue economy will become the major decisions of the development working group. And of course, one of the aspects related to waste, and of course, inside of the waste, food waste is very important there, that to be discussed under development working group as well on the green and blue economy. So we really would like to see that there is a very close link later between the other working groups under the G20. So then this aspect, food loss and waste, can become one of the topics that to be part of the G20 decisions. So of course we have to work together, we have to communicate our decisions, and we need to bring this issue on the table of decisions in the G20 process. Next. In the closings, of course, I really would like to bring that there has to be a kind of mindset change in not only in just food loss and waste management probably, but of course from the upstream focus on productions to the downstreams. So here in this context, production efficiency and also the behavior change in terms of consumptions, this is a big issues and need to be promoted so then we can reduce the food loss and waste. Collaborations is a key effort, is a key measures that we have to do together. State actors or non-state actors have to work together to overcome this issue. And as a global platform, G20 as a global platform, we really recommend to bring this to become big decisions under the G20 decisions. I think I would like to stop my presentation in this slide, Richard. Thank you very much for your attention. I will give it back again the floor to Richard.
And thank you, Dr. Madrilzam. That was just brilliant. I mean, I just thought the way you brought it to life for Indonesia was really impressive. And just to sort of echo some of those numbers that you had, 4 to 5% of Indonesia's GDP in food loss and waste. It's just an extraordinary number, and 7.3% of the greenhouse gas emissions. So that it's interesting to think this is exemplifying the case for action on food loss and waste. So it's now, and by all means, please do continue to put your questions into the chat. It's now my pleasure to introduce the second speaker from this session, Gustavo Porpino, who works in the research team of the Embrapa Foods and Territories in Brazil. He holds a PhD in business administration with a concentration in marketing from Getulio Vargas Foundation and a graduate diploma of business from the Queensland University of Technology. He was a visiting scholar at Cornell University School of Agriculture in the US, where he conducted research on food consumption behavior, and recently he has led 2 projects in the sector dialogues of the European Union, Brazil, on food waste. He is an active member of the United Nations Environment Programme Working Group about food loss and waste in Latin America, and he collaborates with initiatives on food and with the FAO and the MAX G20 Working Group on Food Losses and Waste led by Tunen, and WWF in the areas of food security and circular economy. So an excellent CV for this presentation, Gustavo. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
A lot, Richard. I'm glad to be here today, early in the morning. Good morning and good afternoon. I will now share my screen. Hold on, please. All right, sounds good. So in a world facing a climate crisis, a long COVID pandemic, and also conflicts, it's very glad to see that the G20 can work together in this critical point, which is the mitigation of food losses and waste. I will share some thoughts on food waste in Brazil, the data we have already available, and opportunities for action. My area of expertise is consumer and retail food waste. I will bring some fresh data, especially on retail food waste in Brazil. Embrapa, it's a public company linked to the Ministry of Agriculture in Brazil, and our core business is to develop innovations. And I'll talk about some research development and innovations aligned with circular economy, especially the circular economy for foods. It's also great to mention that Brazil is facing a food tax and ag tax boom. Embrapa is also involved in these interactions with food tax and ag tax, and I will make some comments about it. I will also highlight the role of NGOs and the civil society in the initiatives to mitigate food losses and waste in Brazil, and opportunities for action, especially when it comes to the measurement of consumer food waste. First and foremost, we must say that food waste is a hot topic in Brazil. In the past 2 years, the National Food Supply Chain has conducted a National Food Supply Forum. The last one was just this month of June. And they elected, when I say they elected, I mean food retailers, industries, food industries representatives, and also government representatives. They elected these 5 core areas that requires attention. One of them is cost reduction, tax reform. The second one, it's also related to food waste, which is to educate more consumers, to increase conscious consumption. Food waste reduction is the third one. And we perceive that the focus of the discussion is the best before, the introduction of a best before date type in Brazil. We do not have this sort of labeling in Brazil yet. In my opinion, I believe that the focal point of the discussion should not be the best before, because, for instance, if you analyze the food waste at supermarkets, most of the food waste is related to fresh produce, as I will mention soon. We have many opportunities for action. I'm not saying that the best before discussion is not relevant. It is relevant, but it might be the case that should not be the #1 priority. Another key area is to connect the hunger and the waste maps in Brazil. Of course, Brazil is a huge nation, and sometimes the regions that waste more foods are not necessarily the ones that are facing more food insecurity. And finally, the environmental, social, and government issues are also being highlighted in this national food supply chain as a priority, which is great as well. When it comes to consumer food waste, the current data we have in Brazil is from a study we conducted in 2018 and 2019, Embrapa in partnership with FGV and funded by the European Union. And we come up with this data of 128.8 kilos per capita of food being wasted per Brazilian family. This is an average and takes into account just the household consumption. We are not counting here the waste from supermarkets or even restaurants and other food services. This is just household food consumption. Then I believe that the scenario in Brazil is similar to the scenario we just saw being presented about Indonesia. Of course, this sort of quantifications need to be more frequent. We know that the COVID pandemic has impacted food consumption behavior all over the world, and in Brazil is no different. The food basket prices, for instance, in the past 3 years have increased quite a lot, about between 15 and 20% per year. And then some foods that were most consumed some 5 or 10 years ago, such as rice, beans, and beef, are not being consumed that much, especially in the lower income segments, if we analyze it today. This data is quite interesting. It's a very fresh study, let's say, that was published this month as in a partnership between the Swedish Environmental Protection Agency, the University of Borås in Sweden, and 2 Brazilian public universities. It's quite interesting because they did a pilot project in street markets to quantify foods being wasted in street markets in the city of São Paulo. São Paulo, of course, is the biggest city in Brazil. It has more than 100 food street markets. And the average of wasted foods, avoidable food waste at São Paulo street markets per year is 18,400 tons. The majority of this avoidable food waste is composed of leaf vegetables, tomatoes, oranges, and bananas. This is interesting because when we analyze the data we have from Brazilian supermarkets, tomatoes, oranges, and bananas, and also leaf vegetables also appear in terms of quantity as the most wasted foods. There is a great portion of unavoidable food waste, mainly composed of coconut, sugarcane bagasse, and peels. And this is also an opportunity for us to study more ways to generate new biofertilizers. When it comes to retail food waste, and I mean supermarkets food waste, the Brazilian Association of Supermarkets is quite well organized. We call it ABRAS, and they do an annual quantification in this sector involving 228 supermarket chains and more than 3,500 stores all over Brazil. The newest data we have is that 80% of the wasted foods in Brazilian supermarkets are perishable produce, such as fruits, vegetables, meat, and fish. This is an opportunity for us, as I said, to compost more this waste, but not only to compost more, but also to deviate part of this waste that is perfectly good for consumption for food banks, for instance. Tomatoes is the most wasted food product in terms of quantity in Brazilian supermarkets, followed by bananas, oranges, and leaf vegetables. So we have here a scenario similar to the one from food street markets. And it's also important to note that almost half of the Brazilian supermarkets are not yet engaged in food donations. But we do have a legal framework that supports supermarkets to donate foods, for instance, to the Brazilian food banks. What we need is to foster the Brazilian network of food banks, because we do have food banks in every Brazilian state, but if we analyze the number of cities in Brazil, for instance, and the number of food banks, we can say that food banks are present in just between 5 and 8% of the Brazilian cities. What we should do is to persuade ABRAS, the Brazilian Association of Supermarkets, to open the data set of this analysis they do every year. They do not open the entire data set, just part of it, but would be very useful for researchers, my colleagues from Embrapa and other Brazilian institutions and policymakers, to have access to the entire data set of this research the Brazilian Association of Supermarkets does every year. Embrapa, as I said, is the core business of Embrapa is research, development, and innovation. We have several technologies that help to reduce food losses and waste along the food supply chain from farm to fork. I'm mentioning just 3 of them because they are quite interesting in my point of view. The first one is the biodegradable packaging for mango exports, not only for mango, but for mango is already being applied. It's interesting because they use coconut fiber, which is a residue quite common in most of the Brazilian states. It's a solution for minimally processed fruits. It's already been tested for mangoes, for instance, and it decomposes in less than 6 months. The second one is the antimicrobial edible films. These edible films are quite interesting because they can use waste from papaya, from passion fruit, from beetroot. They extend the conservation of various foods, and they have the possibility of wide use by food industry, also by retailers. And the third one is a Carnaúba wax nano emulsion for application on fruits. The Carnaúba wax itself is not a new technology for the conservation of fruits. This one has a nano emulsion with a nano inputs that are antimicrobial, and it enhances the conservation of fruits. It increments the shelf lives of several fruits by 10 to 15 days compared to the conventional method. And it's also already been implemented for the exports of mangoes, papayas, the ones that goes to Europe. And it's interesting because before this technology, some fruits had to travel from Brazil to Europe by airplane because to arrive there faster, for instance. But the cost of the airplane transportation, of course, is much higher than by ship. And now some producers are able to export fruits, even coconuts, by sea, utilizing this Carnaúba wax nano-emulsion. If you are interested in knowing more about these technologies and others, please contact me. I can put you in touch with the researchers that are leading these research projects. There are several other technologies, but we don't have time to mention them. I have also mentioned that Brazil is facing, I would say, a food tech and agri-tech boom, which is great. We are seeing that Embrapa and other governmental agencies are interacting more with social entrepreneurs and also with investors in open innovation challenges for startups. Embrapa itself has 15 open innovation challenges targeting, for instance, the milk sector, the beef cattle sector, soybean, cotton, and so on. And we have mapped recently through this study, Radar AgTech, the scenario of the startups in the agricultural sector in Brazil. And it's quite amazing because we identified 1,574 agtechs in every Brazilian region, but the majority are located in the southeast region, especially in São Paulo state. We have 20 agriculture and livestock innovation hubs. And when we analyze this 1,574 agtechs, 717 are after the farm gate. And most of them are innovative foods and new food trends. When I say innovative foods and new food trends, I'm also considering upcycled foods. Some of them are helping to reduce food waste or food losses. This study is available in English. This is the link. You guys can access the study. It's quite interesting also for benchmarking for other G20 countries to do a mapping of startups and so on. Another point that caught us the attention is the digitalization of the e-commerce, the online grocery, the online restaurants and meal kits. It increased a lot in Brazil during the pandemics in the past 2 or 3 years. And some of them startups are implementing new business models, also helping to reduce food losses or waste through, for instance, the direct connections of smallholders with urban consumers. In relation to the NGOs, there are several initiatives all over Brazil to fight both hunger and food waste. I'm mentioning these 3 ones because I also believe they are quite interesting, but there are many others. This movement, Todos à Mesa, which means everyone at the table, is quite recent. It was launched during the pandemic, and from October 2021 to May this year, they have distributed 3,400 tons of foods. It involves several food industries and also retailers and NGOs mainly in the Southeast region, because most of the food industries in Brazil are located in São Paulo, Rio, and other Southeast region states. The second one is the Banco de Alimentos NGO. It's a food bank, but also they work with nutritional education. They started in São Paulo, but now they are also working even in Pará state in the north region of Brazil. And it's amazing because in 2021, given the food crisis, the increase in food insecurity, the demand for food donation increased a lot, and they have distributed almost 3 million kilos of foods last year, benefiting more than 680,000 people, mainly in São Paulo state. And third, and not least important, Gastromotiva, which is an amazing social gastronomy initiative that started in Rio de Janeiro during the Olympics and is increasing importance in the past 3 years. They are also working with an NGO in Mexico. They have several solidarity kitchens in São Paulo state, in Rio state, in Curitiba, the capital of Paraná state. And I believe that the importance of these NGOs are amazing, and they should work together more with the government, the food industry, and the food retailer in coalitions, as Richard has mentioned. When it comes to the startups, I would like to highlight the work these 4 ones are doing, because they have different business models, and the core business of each one is also distinct. The first one is Restin, which is a nickname that means leftovers, using a slang that is very popular in Minas Gerais state. Minas Gerais is one of the biggest states in Brazil, and they have this word Restin to represent leftovers. And it's a smart platform connecting food industries with food services, utilizing the concept of first in, first out. They have changed the business model. Initially, they were focusing on urban consumers, just like the Food to Save mobile app, but now they changed the business model, and they are increasing, they are growing now, even hiring new employees. So Food to Save is a mobile app similar to Too Good To Go, which is popular in Europe. The third one is quite interesting. The Connecting Food is a smart food donation management for retailers. They have several clients already, big players from the retail sector in Brazil. And this last one, Greeners, is a digital platform connecting food industries to small and medium retailers, which is quite interesting as well, because usually small and medium retailers do not have the investment to run their own digital platforms. And then food industries can sell for a reduced price to these small and medium retailers, for instance, foods that are close to the expiration dates. Last but not least important, in terms of food waste measurement opportunities, I perceive that we do have to measure more the household food waste in Brazil. As I said, we have only one big study conducted 3 years ago, and we could use waste composition analysis, which is the most robust method recommended by UNEP as a means to enter in the food waste index, and combined with consumer panels, online consumer panels, for us to evaluate the impact of the COVID pandemic in food consumption habits in countries such as Brazil. It's also important to note that in Brazil, we have several food supply centers called SEASAs. They are almost in every Brazilian state. 23 SEASAs are organized in an association called Abracem, and it would be great to conduct also waste composition analysis at these SEASAs. For you guys to have an idea, in the CEAGESP, which is the biggest food supply center in South America, located in São Paulo, the average food waste per day is 100 tons, mainly composed of fruits and vegetables. But they do have a food bank in there, and without a food bank located at CEAGESP, the amount of wasted foods per day would be more than double of this 100 ton I mentioned to you. And finally, waste composition analysis in street markets. We had this initial pilot project in São Paulo, and this methodology already validated in São Paulo could be replicated in other Brazilian capitals would be very interesting. Tarima, Kazi, thanks a lot again. This is my contact details, and I'm also available now for questions.
And thank you very much indeed, Gustavo. And I really like the combination there of measurement, but also solutions. And great to see this fantastic innovations that you're beginning to see coming through in the Brazilian market. So that may be something that people might want to answer more questions about. But thank you, Gustavo. That was a really excellent insight. So I really appreciate that. So now moving on to the final speaker of the session, it's my pleasure to introduce Clementine O'Connor. Clementine O'Connor is the focal point for food waste and sustainable diets at the United Nations Environment Programme. She co-authored the 2021 Food Waste Index report, developing new global food waste estimates and a common methodology for countries to measure and report on food waste, a key step forward. Clementine works with countries in all regions on food waste measurement, reduction and knowledge sharing. Prior to joining UNEP as a program management officer, Clementine helped to develop and launch Champions 12.3, a high-level coalition to deliver SDG 12.3 that RAP, amongst others, and the World Resources Institute are part of. And Clementine was the lead author of the European Commission's PrEP study on food waste in the EU 27, developing the first EU food waste baseline and environmental impact assessment in 2010. Really good to have you, Clementine. Over to you.
So much. Quick technical question. Yes, I now have permission to share my screen. Thanks a lot for that. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Thank you so much to Indonesia for the invitation to present, and thanks a lot to RAP, to Brazil and Indonesia for the enlightening presentations today. I sometimes have bandwidth issues, so if that's the case, please let me know in the chat and I'll turn off my camera. I'm going to start today by looking at the state of global food waste data. As you know, we have a global framework for addressing food loss and waste, which is target 12.3 to reduce food loss across supply chains and to halve per capita food waste at retail and consumer level by 2030. UNEP is the custodian of the Food Waste Index and published last year the Food Waste Index report that finds that 17% of all food available to consumers is wasted each year. This is almost 1 billion tons of food that is going to waste at household, retail, and food service level each year. The report also, and importantly, provides a common approach to measuring and reporting on food waste in the context of Target 12.3. The report was able to find 152 data points in 54 countries. A lot of these are in high-income countries, but we did have a reasonable amount of data in middle-income countries as well. Again, the strength of data is higher in the household sector. This is also the largest sector. 61% of food waste occurs in households. We find, importantly, that in almost every country that has measured household food waste, it is significant. It is not an issue that is confined to high-income countries, but it is something that all countries around the world, particularly in the current context, could benefit from support in having systematic approaches to addressing that. The global average is 74 kilos per person per year of household food waste, which is greater than the weight of the average person. The countries that currently have high confidence food waste index compatible data by sector, you can see here. You'll also note that there remain a lot of countries in the G20 that do not yet have good or any food waste data, and this really is a gap that we urgently seek to address, and we call upon you to prioritize this. As we can see here, collecting the food waste data is a catalyst for action. It presents the scale of the problem, which is too easily ignored or assumed is not, or it is assumed that it is not significant until the data proves this. Otherwise, the data creates a case for change, allows you to target and understand hotspots. It allows you to track progress to 2030, and it can allow you to evaluate the efficacy of specific interventions to see what works best in your country. To help countries to put this in place, UNEP, together with RAP, launched last October regional food waste working groups, where we are supporting 25 countries to measure and report on food waste. The forum enables peer-to-peer learning and best practice sharing, support for the development of national food waste prevention strategies, and guidance on integrating food waste in NDCs. Here you have a snapshot of the countries that take part in the group, and the active engagement of these countries since last October is highly valued. We will be beginning a new series of workshops in October, and we would be glad to include some further countries, and would be delighted to extend the invitation to Indonesia as well. The regional food waste working groups take the Champions 12.3 target, measure, act approach, and add a focus on finance and investment, working with countries to identify suitable funding opportunities where possible to finance food waste measurement and reduction. The second cycle of workshops that will begin this year will have a focus on these 4 key areas: consumer behavior change programs, including putting in place awareness campaigns and creating an enabling environment to help consumers to reduce food waste at home, public-private partnerships that help food businesses to work collaboratively across supply chains to eliminate waste, circular food systems transitions, including separate collection of food waste, support for redistribution, innovation and circular business models, as well as composting and recycling infrastructure, as well as policy approaches and guidance. Here you can see these maps onto the waste hierarchy, consumer behavior change programs, public-private partnerships that span a lot of that hierarchy, focus a little bit further down on the circular food systems, transitions, and policy across the spectrum. I wanted to highlight quickly, before I close, an opportunity to connect food waste prevention with country commitments to the global methane pledge, which is to reduce methane emissions by 30% by 2030. Organic material, in particular food waste, decomposing in landfills is a key driver of waste methane. The global methane assessment finds three behavior changes: improved livestock management, food loss and waste reduction, and the adoption of healthier diets to have the potential to reduce methane by 65 to 80 million tons per year. So this is really an important opportunity here. I would also like to quickly highlight that in the last 3 years, the mention of food loss and waste in NDCs has increased from 11 to about 45 countries. This is mostly cited as a mitigation measure, but it is also included under adaptation approaches as well. We've pulled out some example practices from country NDCs, which range from general data evoking the mitigation and adaptation opportunity, the identification of specific actions that support that aim, supplementing that by connecting it to policies and strategies within the country, and as a best practice, including specific targets or indicators on food loss and waste reduction in NDC. So I'd like to close with the G20 opportunity as we say this. It would include to adopt the Target Measure Act approach to food loss and waste reduction if your country has not already done so, to align food loss and waste reduction with climate strategies, and to pursue supply chain collaboration on food loss and waste reduction through public-private partnerships. So thanks so much for your attention today and for the opportunity to speak. Thanks again.
And thank you very much indeed, Clementine. Really appreciate that. And I particularly love the way you brought it all together in terms of the approaches that can work to help reduce food loss and waste, and that consumer behavior change, public-private partnerships, circular food systems, and legislative approaches or policy approaches. So really, really good to see all that brought together. And also the support that's available from UNEP in that. So I'm sure people would be interested in that. But thank you very much indeed. And also, I hope you'll join us all now, bringing all the speakers back together to talk about questions that are arising from this debate. So we've got about 30 minutes for questions, and it's great to see the questions are beginning to come in to the group. And I'm just going to start, actually, if you don't mind, with a sort of a personal question before I then move on to the one specifically, which is just, and Gustavo, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then I'm going to move over to Mr. Madrilzam.
Sure, no problem.
Just in terms of sort of big picture, given the food crisis that we're all facing, how has that affected in Brazil? How has that affected the prioritization of food loss and waste reduction?
This is interesting because, in my opinion, the solution to fight hunger does not necessarily mean that we need to produce more food, but rather we should prioritize incrementing the availabilities of fresh foods via food waste reduction. And of course, the role of public policies are very important. And during the COVID pandemic, a new law was approved by the Brazilian Congress late in 2020 to facilitate food donation to food banks. I have mentioned this. It's a law similar to the Good Samaritan law from the US, and this increased the food donations to the network of Brazilian food banks. The Brazilian network of food banks has about 90 very well managed food banks in the network called Mesa Brazil, and about 100 others run by NGOs or municipalities. We are also seeing that the government, NGOs, and also municipalities are more engaged in the food agenda, in the food security agenda. And Embrapa itself, it's running, as I mentioned, several open challenges to connect these different stages of the food chain, which is great because as Embrapa, we can connect, for instance, food producers with entrepreneurs and investors. And it's easier for us to come up with innovations when several actors sit at the table and discuss ideas, let's say.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think bringing people together, Gustavo, is key to this, absolutely key. And Dr. Madrilzam, just in terms of in Indonesia as well, how has the food crisis also refocused attention or changed the importance of tackling food loss and waste in your view? Oh, I think you're on mute, Dr. Madrilzam.
Okay, so sorry. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yes, of course. Right now, Indonesia also experiencing some kind of surging price on foods, yeah, on our commodity as well internally, and there is a kind of some increasing some understanding now about the importance of the behavior change in terms of, well, a bit saving some foods, not to be accessing portions on our plate, but we're still in that level, improving some this understanding first, because it's not easy, to bring this fact into the communities, into the people, in particular also in the production side aspect. But certainly this aspect need actually getting paid more attentions. And after our study, actually medias right now keep informing to the public about this issue. And I have been talking to a lot of medias now, explaining about this. And right now, it's very often on the top page of the media, not only in the newspaper, but also in the radio, sometimes in the televisions. So it's getting there now. Although still, well, it's still need to be pushed further. But in terms of decision-making process, well, it is getting much better now. Although it is just in a short sometimes short times, yeah, to introduce this, and well, it's getting there, but still need to have a lot of push from us.
And that's a really interesting point, actually, this point about sort of getting more widespread understanding of the issue. And there is already one question coming through. Actually, it was for Gustavo, but I'm going to actually ask it to both Dr. Madrilzam and Gustavo, which is, given the incredible data that both of you presented and the solutions you've outlined, how are the population in general reacting to reducing food loss and waste? And actually, Madrilzam, I'm going to start with you because that linked to what you've just said, and just wondering, given the increase that you're seeing in publicity around this, how are the population responding? And then I'll come back to you, Gustavo, for your thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Richard. And yes, as I mentioned before, well, I just refer back to a very close people around me, say my family. I just wonder to them, actually, have you now have you been aware about these issues, and you have already access to bring many foods into your plates, but the reactions was quite surprising for me, because the kids right now, well, try to try to introduce what they thought about the food content that they have on the plate, and they said that, well, seems to me that the understanding about not to have the excess food on the table is getting there on the young people, but not on the older one. The older one still need to be, well, need to be more educated, probably, people like us, probably, because we need to have a bigger food in our stomachs, probably. But, well, still need a lot of uh, struggle to bring this understanding much better into the society, but it is getting better.
That's really good. And it's really good that you're getting the impact with the young people, because actually a lot of data around the world has shown that young people are actually a big source of food waste in the homes, largely
Yes.
because they lack the skills. So that's really great. And Gustavo, I wonder, what's the experience in Brazil?
Here in Brazil, the media is talking a lot about food waste these days as well, and we believe that the population is more aware of the food waste problem. But when it comes to consumer behavior change, it's a long process that requires a lot of efforts, nutritional education, communications for behavior change. And we know that even positive intentions can lead to food waste. The good mother identity is really present in the Brazilian culture, not only in the Brazilian culture, but in Latin culture in general. Brazilian consumers value abundance in the table. Of course, when I say Brazilian consumers, it's the middle class and the upper middle class. These days, the lower middle class cannot afford to have food abundance. But it's still a problem, consumer food waste. But we just have to understand how the COVID pandemic has impacted consumer behavior in Brazil in the past 2 years. And we are sure that with more data, we can have more precise public policies as well.
Yeah, and I think that linkage between data and public policies is absolutely key, Gustavo. I thought that's a really interesting point. But that also your point about abundance, and this is in many cultures around the world, the idea that how you show how you show your pleasure about being with people is having abundance of food, and that's and that can lead, and we've seen this in many countries around the world, and that can lead to significant amount of food waste. It also leads to perhaps thinking about how you target your messages around making good use of any food that's left over from those events, from those social events, and that could be a key focus actually for consumer behavior change campaigns. Clementine, I'm just wondering from your experience, just how you see sort of consumer behavior change fitting into the overarching agenda on tackling food loss and waste.
That's a good question. Indeed, we conducted some research last year on the causes of consumer food waste in Kampala in Uganda, which found causes that were quite in line with those that we've seen in many 20 countries, which shows universality of this problem, but with some additional challenges on access to cooling that were particular to the region. We are and have developed a systematic approach to consumer behavior change programs that target, that conduct the research to understand which types of households have the highest rates of food waste and what the drivers and causes of that food waste is, which enables us to target and to refine the approaches that are put in place to help tackle the issues in each country. Yeah, I just want to highlight that there are a handful of countries that are beginning to show deep cuts in household food waste, up to 25% in the last 10 years or so. So I think this shows that this really is possible, and we have the approaches that work. It's just a case of scaling those up now. Thanks.
Thanks, Clementine. That's a key point, isn't it? That a number of countries are beginning to deliver this change and using these insights to deliver substantial reductions in consumer food waste, which is great. Gustavo, I'm just going to come. There's a couple of questions for you in terms of linking to data. One is around the sort of proportions of avoidable and unavoidable waste, and this is a sort of key issue because it obviously helps you decide where to focus your activities. So a little bit more detail on that. What is the proportion? And also in terms of household food waste, how have you put together those estimates on household food waste, and does that involve from measurement in the home? So if I could just ask you to deal with those, that'd be great.
Great. In relation to the household food waste study, we adapted a methodology from Wageningen University and validated it in Brazil with a big pre-test. This methodology was used in the Refresh project from the European Union. It was not just a survey, but we used a robust consumer panel. We had respondents from every Brazilian state and also from distinct social classes. This sample was representative of the Brazilian population. And we also combined it with a digital platform. And in this digital platform, consumers could upload photos of the foods wasted. It was not just answering the questionnaire, but we had also this proof, which were the photos of the actual foods being wasted. So it was quite interesting, but it requires, of course, a bigger effort to collect data and also some IT expertise in this consumer panels. In relation to the avoidable and unavoidable portions, at the street markets in the pilot project conducted in São Paulo, the majority of the wasted foods are unavoidable, about 2/3, mainly fruit peels, coconut fiber, and also in a pilot project utilizing a waste composition analysis in Brasilia, the majority of the wasted foods at the household level were also unavoidable food waste. Again, the majority of this, about more than half, being fruit peels, eggshells, and also coconut fiber.
Oh, thank you, Gustavo. And that's really important data to really understand how to prioritize the efforts and where you can really focus. Dr. Madrilzam, I'm just going to come back to you with a specific question for you about Indonesia. And reducing food loss and waste, as we've all said, contributes to greenhouse gas emissions reductions. Is the reduction of food loss and waste accounted for in Indonesia's NDC at the moment? And how can the government support in the food loss and waste data collection from farm to fork?
Okay, thank you very much, Richard, and from Brian here. Basically, what we have already included in our emission profile in our NDC is only food waste. We haven't included the food loss yet, since the calculations of the food loss need to be very, very robust and comprehensive. But in Paris at the time when we commit in our NDC, food waste, yes, it's a big issue and it's part of our NDC calculations, but not food loss. But right now, since we are getting much better in terms of understanding on the food loss and waste, we are trying to go into that to combine between food loss and waste. But probably the food loss content will be included in part of agriculture's contributions on the emissions. So we have 5 sectors in our NDCs: energy, land use, forest, agriculture, waste, and IPPU. But perhaps the agriculture sector later will accommodate these food loss calculations for our emission profile in Indices. But right now, only food waste is included.
But that's really good, given the observation by Clementine that only around 43 countries have actually got it in. So it's great to see that within Indonesia's NDC. That's really fantastic. Clementine, there's a question specifically for you about the Food Waste Index report. The questions around, can you just briefly explain the methodology of food waste measurement? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thanks so much for the question. So the approach was provided in the Food Waste Index report, but across the last year in the regional food waste working groups, we have worked with our 25 countries to refine this and put this into practice. So the approach that we recommend for the household sector is to use a minimum sample size of 400 households and to collect the waste, the total waste, not to ask the household to separate food waste, because we would prefer that they don't know that this is a study on food waste in particular, as this can bias the results. So to collect waste from the 400 households each day for 1 week, and to conduct a waste composition analysis on this that identifies and weighs the food waste fraction and the edible and inedible parts. So within that, and that will provide a robust food waste index compatible baseline. I would encourage India to please get in touch if they would like to join the working group for Asia Pacific.
Thank you, Clementine. That's great, and that invitation to join sounds a really good one. And also, exactly as you say, the methodology is sort of laid out in the report. But that support, from that ongoing support from you, I'm sure will be really welcome to those at the event today. So I'm now there's another question, Gustavo, and I'd like to probably open it up to Dr. Madrilazam as well, about the framework for food donation on food banks. And I just wonder if you'd say a little bit about how that's being encouraged. And you particularly spoke about how that needs to be expanded, but just say us briefly about how the legal framework for food donation food banks is operating.
That's great. So the Brazilian Congress approved this bill in 2020. The bill protects from civil liability several food services that are willing to donate healthy foods to final consumers or to organizations that attend consumers and people in need. It applies not only to supermarkets, but also to industrial kitchens, restaurants, and food industries. We believe food donations have increased after this bill being approved in 2020, in late 2020. But in fact, we need to expand the food banks network, as I have mentioned, and also to discuss more the opportunities with retailers and food industries, given that they have this legal framework that supports more food donations in Brazil.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point, Gustavo, isn't it? Because it's the policy environment really only creates the opportunity for the expansion of the sector. it doesn't guarantee that it actually does expand. And so, and this is building on Clementine's point of using the target, measure, act approach. Once businesses are aware of how much food waste, and this is where your work, Gustavo, has really helped with that. Once they understand where the food waste is, then having a legal framework for redistribution as being part of the action is so important. Dr. Madrilzam, where do you see food redistribution fitting in within Indonesia? And I noticed in your presentation you did talk about some good startups and some new entrants there also that are beginning to make a difference in Indonesia.
Yep, so thank you very much. This actually the regulation aspect is very important, in particular when we develop the food bank policies. You know, when we talk about food bank, well, of course, there are a lot of aspects need to be considered about the food safety and also some risk that the organizer of the food bank need to be considered. So basically, we are just initiating the discussions on how then to on the food bank regulations. But of course, in terms of a supporting aspect with regards to the food banks, I believe colleagues from the food bank organizations have already, you know, considered several indirect regulations that probably can hinder the operations of the food bank itself. So, but we're just coordinating these issues and we try to accommodate what sort of concerns that actually right now raised by the food banks organizations. And I believe this will become kind of priorities for the governments to provide some kind of very clear regulations, mechanisms, in particular how then to provide some to incentivize this kind of approach, since we know that this can provide some good economic benefit for the countries.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's so key. Having the environment in there is key, but also it's great to see some new entrants coming in with some novel business models, you know, basically online platforms. That you know, Gustavo mentioned this as well, and I know this is in Indonesia. I know it's actually in many European countries, including the UK, where actually the interface between the redistribution of the food banks and retailers and food manufacturers and food businesses generally is all done online and making it very slick. And it's lovely to see these models now beginning to come out. You know, in Indonesia, a similar model to what's happening in Brazil, but also similar to what's happening in many European countries as well. So a good development there, I think. I'm just thinking now that, and thank you, Gustavo, for also answering some of the questions in the chat. That's really very helpful. I'm just wanting to ask all three of you actually, what you think are the key gaps that are holding us back from acting rapidly on food waste. And I think I'm going to start with Gustavo, then go to Dr. Madrilzam, and then to Clementine. Gustavo.
Thanks, Richard. This is a very important question. And I think a key issue is the governance of the food agenda in general. In huge nations such as Brazil, there is a need to better delineate which role the federal government could perform. We need to involve more municipalities in the food agenda, and we know that the municipalities are getting more and more engaged. And also to improve interministerial initiatives and the involvement of distinct government, not only distinct government levels, but also the private sector. Then, as you have mentioned in your presentation, Richard, public-private coalitions are really important for Brazil. We have already good cases being organized by Australia and Mexico recently. This is a feasible opportunity for Brazil and also for Argentina. I'm also aware Argentina is organizing a multi-stakeholder task force to tackle food waste. Also in Dominican Republic, there is a good initiative. So governance and more public-private coalitions are two very important points. And the third one is measurement. We know that we need to measure more often consumer food waste, not only consumer food waste, but losses in general and waste from farm to fork, because Brazil is a huge producer of foods in general. And finally, the reduction of food waste at the retail level in particular does not necessarily need disruptive innovations. It's much more a matter of organization and behavior change. But it's a complex issue because the commercial agreements between retailers and farmers are not always fair. And sometimes if a given supermarket, for instance, wastes 100 kilos of tomatoes, the cost of this waste will be paid by the supplier, not by the supermarket itself.
Yeah, and that's a really important point. Is at the heart of this is why public-private partnerships can be part of the solution. Is getting the whole supply chain together to look at where the opportunities are and change practices that are currently driving food loss and waste, rather than reducing food loss and waste. I think that's really key. But also, I think your point about behavior change. A lot of the solutions to reducing food loss and waste are actually around changing the way businesses behave. And how they manage their food stocks, how they train their staff, and there's some real opportunities for some quick wins. And that's one of the reasons that RAP and WRI thought that you got such great returns on investment actually from working on food loss and waste reduction activities. So thank you. And Dr. Madril, same question to you really. What do you think the key gaps are holding us back?
Well, I think the key gaps is actually we still lack of collaborations among private sectors, governments, even the media, community itself, and even the research institutes. I think the pentahelix approach need to be put on the table when we talk about food loss and waste. We have to work together in a more concerted efforts. We know that we need to have community people involved here from the behavior change, as Gustavo mentions. We need to see the private sectors also change, and I believe the private sectors will be geared toward this direction because the green, the ESG, and all those kind of things right now really influence the private sector operations. And of course, they have to consider this food loss and waste aspect as well in their operations later. The media, of course, they are very concerned. Media is really interested in having these issues on the news. Last but not least, Gustavo also mentioned in his presentation about technology here. I think the research institutes need to be very more proactive and innovative to produce the technology to reduce this food loss and waste. So if we work together in more concerted effort, I believe food loss and waste can be reduced in the future. Over back again.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Madril. I totally agree. I think that partnership approach is absolutely key, and also getting media and media influencers on side. Because one of the things that I think RAP has found in its work around the world is that nobody's in favor of food waste. Nobody thinks food waste is a good idea. And it's almost seeing if we can harness that a little bit in terms of actually driving the collaborations, particularly, I think you put your finger on this, the collaboration between governments and businesses all working towards this common goal, I think is so important. Clementine, what's your thoughts on these key gaps that are holding us back?
I think that if I had to pick one thing, this will come as no surprise. Please make sure your country is tracking food waste robustly. And if your country has expertise in food waste measurement and reduction and would like to share this with other countries in the G20 and beyond, please get in touch with us. We can facilitate that exchange. The regional working groups are supporting peer-to-peer learning. The USA is kindly supporting first research to develop public-private partnerships in Brazil and Colombia. The EU Food Loss and Waste Platform supports ongoing exchange between the 27 member states. This collaboration between countries is critical. Thanks a lot.
Oh, thank you, Clementine. I think that's a really interesting angle, isn't it? We've talked about collaboration, as being within countries, between businesses and governments. But actually, that's great to highlight that other important point, which is the sharing of best practice across the world about what works, and also insights, because what we really learn from is what doesn't work. So I think that sharing of insights and the role that UNEP is playing in that is really, really critical, and actually a role that G20 could also play in making sure there's greater sharing. So we're coming to the end of the Q&A session, and I'm going to take the moderator's privilege of asking the annoying last question to each of you. I'm going to start with Gustavo, which is, if there's one thing you would like the participants in this session and the G20 to take away from this session, what would that one thing be? So Gustavo, you first, then I'll go to Dr. Madrilzam, and then finish up with Clementine. Over to you.
Word collaboration, as Dr. Madrilzam has mentioned, is very important. Yesterday, Máximo Toreiro from FAO has mentioned the global coalition Food is Never Waste. So I believe there are two very important points that the G20 can help. The first one is to make things happen in this global coalition, the Food is Never Waste coalition, that was launched last year during the Food System Summit. And the second one is to organize national level food coalitions, including players, actors from farm to fork. Thanks a lot again.
Yeah, excellent. Yes, and thank you for mentioning the Food is Never Waste Coalition, which I know we're actually, most of us in this group are all part of, and making that a real force for change is something that the G20 could certainly do. Dr. Madrilzam, your thoughts, your key message.
Well, since we are in the G20 forums, collaboration is not just about pentahelix then. Of course, collaborations between the working groups of the G20 need to be more consolidated, need to be enhanced. So I really appreciate these forums. I'm from the Development Working Group Forum. So probably this kind of information probably will also need to be considered in this development working group. So I really expect that food loss and waste can also enhance in terms of information sharing, data, and also this policy probably in the agriculture's working group forum. Well, collaborations among working group, I think, need to be improved later.
Excellent. Yeah, that's excellent. Great stuff. And I think that collaboration theme amongst the G20 really important. And Clementine, final thoughts from you.
A lot. I agree with what my colleagues have said, and perhaps I can highlight that in the run-up to COP27 this year, perhaps the G20 can lead by example and make sure that food loss and waste is in their NDCs, and that they are taking advantage of the methane mitigation opportunities in food waste reduction. Thanks.
Yeah, and that's excellent. We've got 43 countries now. We'd like to get that up, and G20 could take a lead in that. Thank you, Clementine. I think that's really, really important. Great. Well, thank you. It's just for me opportunity before I just sum up and leave my thoughts on what has been an excellent discussion. Can I first of all say thank you very much indeed to all of the speakers, Dr. Madrilzam, Gustavo, and Clementine. Thank you so much for such insightful presentations, and also for contributing to a really excellent debate. And just some last remaining thoughts from me as moderator. I think what this session has done is been really, really clear on the key importance of tackling food loss and waste at this moment in time. It's a key way of delivering our environmental objectives, but also of improving social conditions, and indeed actually reducing costs when at a time of global inflation. That's a really important part. The second thing is it's really emphasized the importance of collaboration to get to that goal. We'll talk of public-private partnerships, of collaboration within the G20 and collaboration outside the G20. And actually, let's put together a movement, and this is where the Food is Never Waste Coalition can fit in, a movement of countries that are all actually working towards that common goal. And I think the third thing that's come across to me is that we do know how to reduce food loss and waste. And we're seeing some great innovations coming through that are only going to make this go more rapidly. And through collaboration, I think we can therefore act really quickly. And drawing from the list that Clementine said, consumer behavior change, public-private partnerships, circular food systems, and having the right policy environment to facilitate growth will make all the difference to us rapidly delivering against SDG 12.3. So on that note, I can say thank you to the speakers, thank you to you all for participating, and it's now my pleasure to hand back to Sahat to take the session forward. Over to you, Sahat.
Thank you. Thank you to all distinguished speakers, and thank you to you too, Dr. Richard Swanell, for a very good plenary session. We appreciate it. Now, before entering the closing session, we are now have a photo session. So we would like you to open your camera, please. There will be 3 screens. Please open your camera, all of you, please. We still have some more. On the screen, we have 3 screens. On my count, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. The next one, 1, 2, 3, another smile. Yes, okay. And the last one, 1, 2, 3. Smile again. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to start our wrap-up session. For this, we have 4 presenters. We have Ms. Nina Shaw of the Environmental Protection Agency, USA, Professor Handewi Salim, Indonesian Center for Agro-Socioeconomic and Policy Studies, Ministry of Agriculture, Indonesia, Ms. Carola Fabi, FAO, and Ms. Clementina Kanner, UNEP. Without further ado, we would like to invite Ms. Shaw to deliver her notes. Ms. Shaw, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you to Indonesia and to all the distinguished speakers of the last 2 days. I'm truly humbled and honored to be included. The United States is hard at work on the issue of food loss and waste. Our work grows in importance every day as the world faces supply chain and climate change issues that we are all aware of. I'm pleased to share what the United States EPA is doing to promote a circular economy and to discuss food loss and waste more generally. The greenhouse gases associated with food loss and waste is also substantial, as many have already discussed. Recently, the United States Protection Agency completed a study on the environmental impacts of food loss and waste from farm to fork. Given the substantial environmental impacts of food loss and waste, having food loss and waste, as the US aims to do, could meaningfully reduce the resource use and environmental impacts of the United States food system. Researchers estimate that having US food loss and waste could reduce the environmental footprint of the current cradle to consumer food supply chain by more than 300,000 square kilometers of agricultural land, an area greater than Arizona, or 12 trillion liters of blue water, equal to the annual water use of 29 million American homes, or nearly 290,000 metric tons of bioavailable nitrogen from agricultural fertilizer, with the potential to reach a body of water, cause algal blooms, and deteriorate water quality. We could decrease it by 940 million gigajoules of energy, which is enough to power 21.5 million US homes for a year, and by 92 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, equal to the annual CO2 emissions from 23 coal-fired power plants. Note that these estimates are conservative and that these savings can only be achieved through prevention or source reduction of food loss and waste. Recycling of food waste cannot achieve these benefits, since a substantial fraction of the impacts occur during the primary production of food. The EPA strongly believes circularity is a critical tool in the fight against climate change, as others have also mentioned. This will help with biodiversity loss and pollution mitigation, and that developing a circular economy contributes to the Paris Agreement nationally determined contributions and many of the SDG goals and 12.3, as has been discussed. Our circular economy vision begins with designing products to be sustainable, maximizing reuse and recycling, and minimizing the impacts of waste management at the end of life. Our first strategy of the Circular Economy series, the National Recycling Strategy, was released last November and is focused on transforming the municipal solid waste recycling system. But we know that recycling alone is simply not enough. We need a transformative vision for our waste management system, one that is inclusive, more equitable, and reflects the urgency of the climate crisis. Climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution are further complicated by rising inequality, reinforcing the urgency of strengthening the resiliency of food systems and supply chains to withstand and adapt to shocks and stresses that can otherwise lead to poverty backsliding, increased malnutrition, and undermined environmental sustainability. As part of this series, EPA is in the process of developing a national strategy for food loss and waste. Part of this strategy will include the importance of data and measurement on food loss and waste, as we have been discussing for the last 2 days. In particular, EPA is going to be working on assessing the total environmental footprint of food loss and waste in the United States, creating environmental indicators to track the environmental footprint of food loss and waste, enhancing our modeling of the food system to include the generation of food loss and waste by updating our models, refining the understanding of the characteristics of US food loss and waste, developing methods and tools to track the changes in the amount of edible and inedible food loss and waste in the United States with greater frequency and without the use of static food loss waste rates. And lastly, quantify the environmental impacts in other countries that are associated with US food waste and imported foods. In addition, we're starting to develop a consumer behavior campaign, which we are very excited about. We know, as others, including Gustavo, have mentioned, that public-private partnerships are likely to be very important for the strategy in the United States as well. And this strategy is due to be released for public comment this summer and hopefully finalized by the end of 2022. As I reflect on the last 2 days, I'm struck by the similarities of our work, including the importance of stakeholder engagement in research, collecting data, and in implementing our programs. In addition, both Clementine and Richard noted best practice sharing among countries. And I loved Richard's statement on the importance of collaboration. That is so important in this complex area. I very much appreciated the examples from Sweden on reducing the burden to collect data and using interviews to do so. In addition, Brazil's research and development on biodegradable packaging and edible films, as well as carnauba wax, are efforts we can all learn from to work to reduce food loss and waste. Moreover, the work of RAP is certainly a North Star for the United States in their communication and education campaigns and their work to reduce food loss and waste in homes. In addition, the UNEP provides crucial information on how to achieve these ambitious goals that we all have. Lastly, Clementine's comment on methane reduction and leading up to the COP27 is also important. The US released a methane strategy last year, which includes the work on food loss and waste, which we think is so very important. We have so much work to do, but this has been an inspirational 2 days. Thank you for having me, and I look forward to continued meetings with the G20 to discuss this important document. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Ms. Nina Shaw of the Environmental Protection Agency, USA. Now, we would like to have Professor Handewi Salim to deliver the second notes. Ibu Handewi, screen is yours.
Thank you, Sahat. wrap-up workshop on gap analysis on food loss and waste indices 2021 to 22 June to 2022. As a global issue in the UN SDGs achievement, specifically target number 12.3, handling food loss and waste should become a priority in the development agenda of each country. Indonesia considers food loss and waste as one of the most important issues under the priority issues in Agriculture Working Group on promoting a resilient and sustainable agri-food system. During the two days workshop, in-depth discussion was carried out to narrow the gap between measurement methods and available data used to measure food loss and waste. To my knowledge, this workshop to some extent fulfill its objective of helping each G20 members country to significantly reduce food loss and waste. Food loss are a new indicator to be incorporated in the national statistics system, and the strategy for doing so depend on the specific data needs, the policy environment, and available resources and capacities in each country. There are 79 countries that mention the reduction of food loss and waste in their pathway document. The underlying the reliable data need to represent a major challenges for countries to measure and monitor food loss and waste. Data points cover several stages and actors along the food system, which differ between countries, regions, and commodities. The SDGs reporting process and extensive literature review, which culminated in FAO's food loss and waste database, reveal that the data gaps are still evident. While several studies can be found on a discrete part of the supply chain is in a single crop or an indirect macroeconomic estimates, data collection of national food losses are scarce. A coalition of food is never waste was formed during the Food System Summit. Food loss and waste have to identify inefficiencies in the food system to generate more knowledge of the supply chains and also identify critical points. As was reported, measuring food loss and waste in Sweden, taking a co-creative approach involving farmers and industry actors, researchers, and government agencies. The purpose is also to follow up the national milestone target on food loss reduction and the food loss index. The Swedish Board of Agriculture measures food losses as a part of government assignment within the Swedish food strategy. The approach is to use existing data when available and a combination with interviews and field studies. Almost no paper survey are used. Instead, animal statisticians and statistics are used as well as interviews with farmers, fishermen in the food industry. In Ethiopia, reducing pre- and post-harvest losses is one of the major activities to achieve Ethiopia's development plan, where enhancing agriculture production and productivity is one of the major strategic pillars. The data on the volume and pre-harvest damage and post-harvest losses has never been collected and analyzed in the systematic way ever. Therefore, no national level food loss estimates are available. In order to fill this data gap, the Ethiopian Statistics Service, in collaboration with FAO, has designed and conducted a pilot survey for selected green crops covering on-farm and off-farm losses. India has developed an appropriate sampling methodology for quantitative estimation of harvest and post-harvest losses of major crops and commodities. This methodology provides reliable estimates and quantitative harvest and post-harvest losses of 45 crops and commodities in India in various operation and storage in different channels at agroclimate zone level and national level. Overall, as the country has sought improvement in their food system over this period, the variation on loss estimate over some of the key commodities has decreased, indicating that there are likely spillover impact across all supply chain. In Indonesia, Bapenas already have identified baseline data on food loss and waste in 2019 with the environment, economy, and social impact. The study shows that food loss and waste generation is projected to be 344 kg per capita per year in 2045 if Indonesia still do business as usual approach. However, food loss and waste generation can be reduced to 166 kg per capita per year with the implementation of food loss and waste management strategy. The food loss and waste management strategy are behavior changes, improving food system, strengthening regulation and optimizing funding, utilizing food loss and waste, and development of food loss and waste study and data collection. The implementation of food loss and waste management strategy requires support from all stakeholders, including line ministries, non-state actors, and others. Last but not least, the G20 presidency must be optimized as a momentum for knowledge sharing and collaboration in strengthening food loss and waste management practices, including funding, innovation, and technology supports. In Brazil, food waste is a hot topic. Embrapa has reported that food waste in consumer level in Brazil was 102,000 kg per family per year or 41 kg per capita per year. While food waste at Sao Paulo Paulo Street Market was 1,400 tons per year. In Brazilian supermarkets, 80% of waste food are perishable produce. Tomatoes, bananas, oranges, leafy vegetables, and onion are the most waste food in volume. Brazil has food waste mitigation startups. Research and development and innovation in Brazil are aligned with circular economy of food. At least there are 3 NGOs initiatives to fight hunger and food waste in Brazil. The opportunities food waste management in Brazil are waste composition analysis in household and online consumer panel at food supply centers and in street markets. Measuring food waste in country consistent with Sustainable Development Goals 12.3 would be able to track progress over time by UNEPs. This will also useful information to strengthen a case for change and obtain some information useful for prioritizing an issue within a country. UNEP call upon the governments of the G20 to pursue the following strategies to dramatically accelerate effort to halve their food loss and waste by 2030. One is follow the target measure X approach, including reporting baseline using the food waste index. The second one is integrate food loss and waste reduction into climate strategies. And the third one is pursue supply chain collaboration on food loss and waste reduction through public-private partnership. The Waste and Resource Action Program, REP, is taking global initiative action on food waste, which stated that public-private partnership can help reduce food waste. Up to now, at least there are 16 countries that already included in the food waste voluntary agreement, and 2 countries are still developing policy. The workshop is meant to be a starting point to further discussion of national food loss and waste measurement. We hope that it supports valuable insight, lesson learned, and recommendation to keep progressing toward the generation of better food loss and waste information and evidence base. We need to continue this effort with action and collaboration within G20 members countries and interrelevant working group under G20, international organization, private sectors, and civil society organization towards narrowing the food loss and waste data gap and advancing food loss waste action in accordance with their respective mandates. I thank you.
Thank you, Ibu Handewi of the Indonesian Center for Agro-Socioeconomic and Policy Studies, Ministry of Agriculture, Indonesia. Now, we come to the third presenter. We would like to invite Ms. Carola Fabi of FAO to deliver her insights from this workshop. Ms. Carola, please take the screen.
Thank you very much. I would like really, first of all, to thank for have the honor to participate in this important workshop. The first message is really that reducing food loss and waste is an imperative in the world of raising food insecurity, where over the past year, around 120 million people are facing hunger, and where food insecurity in absolute terms is reaching, or is actually over 800 million people in the world in 2020. This is combined with raising food prices, which impact on nutrition security, making healthy diets of diversified food, including fruits and vegetables, not affordable for 3 billion people around the world. So the call for reducing food loss and waste is even higher. We foster and recognize the need for a food systems approach, whereby losses are addressed in, first of all, in the critical loss points, where the interlinkages between the various stages of the value chain, from pre-production to the primary sector, transformation, processing, transport, and ultimately retail and consumption, are taken care of with their trade-offs between actors, the trade-offs between the three dimensions of economic, social, and environmental sustainability, and the cost benefits of interventions are also taken into account. This will only be possible through partnerships between the private and the public sector, increased coordination of stakeholders within the countries, and a stronger evidence base, which is key. And on that, the first session of yesterday showed that it is possible to improve the evidence base, that a variety of solutions can be implemented by countries, and we saw how high-income countries, low-income countries, large countries, or small countries can find cost-effective ways of measuring losses along the supply chain, as well as waste, to formulate effective interventions. We could also see from one of the participating countries who started the measurement over 10 years ago that the interventions that were triggered by their first nationwide loss surveys along the supply chain triggered an improvement of the loss levels 15 years down the road. So this avenue is possible. I would also like to reiterate that FAO is strongly engaged in the reduction of food losses and waste with all stakeholders and from the various angles, by providing technical assistance to countries on food loss and waste, and formulating food loss and waste reduction strategies, in providing, sharing knowledge with countries. And actually during this very workshop, another training of trainers, for example, took place, always within the G20 initiatives on the horticultural chain management, on improved horticultural chain management. FAO is actively supporting the Coalition on Food is Never Waste that stemmed from the Food System Summits of 2021. The organization formulated a code of conduct for voluntary engagement by all stakeholders, whether governments, local governments, the private sector, the civil society, and businesses to reduce food loss and food waste at their own level. FAO is also supporting the Champions 1, 2, 3, and is very keen to sharing knowledge, to creating public goods and sharing knowledge, in particular through its technical platform for the reduction of food loss and waste. The organization is also keen to support the improvement of measurement worldwide, so to engage with countries in setting surveys or alternative measurement methods to improve the evidence base. So we look forward to working together and to continuing this effort with all the countries and the stakeholders, private sector, civil society, to achieve the greater sustainability and of the food systems worldwide. And thank you very much.
you so much, Ms. Fabi. To end this session, we would like to invite Ms. Clementine O'Connor from UNEP to deliver her notes. Ms. O'Connor, we leave the screen for you.
Thank you so much. I'd like to extend my great thanks to the government of Indonesia for organizing this workshop and for the opportunity to contribute. I'd like to congratulate Indonesia for their efforts to measure and to reduce food waste, including the launch of a public-private partnership and the inclusion of food waste in their NDC. I'd like to extend my thanks to Gustavo and to Brazil for their ongoing efforts to advance global best practice, to foster multi-stakeholder collaboration, and to stimulate agricultural and food innovation to deliver target 12.3. I'd like to extend ongoing thanks to Richard and RAP for their leadership, and to FAO for their outstanding collaboration, including in the Food is Never Waste coalition, and as co-convener of International Day of Awareness on Food Loss and Waste. I'd also like to highlight and share our thanks to the US Environmental Protection Agency for their support to our work on expanding public-private partnerships in South America and beyond. This can be catalytic in scaling this successful approach at a global level. I'd like to invite and welcome closer collaboration on food loss and waste in the G20. We can move faster and more effectively. Together. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Connor of UNEP. And that's the end of this wrap-up session. Distinguished participants, speakers, moderator, ladies and gentlemen, now we come to the closing session of this workshop. For this, I would like to invite Dr. Sudi Mardianto, Director of the Indonesian Center for Agriculture, Socioeconomic and Policy Studies, Ministry of Agriculture, to deliver her closing remarks and vote of thanks. Dr. Sudi Mardianto, screen is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and greetings to all of us. His Excellency Minister of Agriculture of the Republic of Indonesia, Secretary General of the Ministry of Agriculture, honorable speakers, resource persons and moderators, distinguished representatives of G20 member countries and international organizations, and all participants of this workshop. First of all, I would like to thank the Almighty God, Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, who has guided us until we finally arrive at the end of our workshop today. We give thanks to God because only with His permission this event can be completely properly. We have learned the importance of food loss and waste issue from this workshop, and the need for G20 member countries to narrowing the gap in measuring food loss and waste so as to enable appropriate policies for sustainable food systems. Reducing food loss and waste should lead to a more sustainable food availability and improve world food security amid the increased trend in global food demand. Allow me to especially thankful His Excellency Ministry of Agriculture, Professor Dr. Sahrul Yassin Limpo, and Secretary General of the Ministry of Agriculture, Dr. Kasdi Subagiono, for their guidance in the implementation of this workshop. Thanks also extended to Dr. Maximo Torero for his welcoming address to frame this workshop. I would especially express my sincere thanks to our speakers. First, Ms. Carola Fabi from FAO. Second, Ms. Karin Lindo, Swedish Board of Agriculture, Sweden. Third, Mr. Ahmed Ibrahim, Central Statistical Agency, Ethiopia. Fourth, Mr. Takir Ahmad, Indian Agricultural Statistics Research Institute, India. Fifth, Mr. Medrizam from Brapanas, Indonesia. Six, Mr. Gustavo Porpino de Arujo, Brazilian Agricultural Research Institute in Brapa, Brazil. Seven, Ms. Clementine O'Connor from UNEP. And also to our two moderators, Ms. Lee N. Jackson of OECD and Mr. Richard Schwanel of Waste and Resource Action Program. My special thanks go to Ms. Nina Shaw of US EPA, Ms. Handewi Purwati Salim of ICASEPS, Ms. Carola Fabi of FAO, and Ms. Clementine O'Connor of UNEP on their valuable notes for this workshop. My heartfelt thanks also extended to my colleagues in organizing this workshop. I understand the hard work of the organizing committee has been carried out in close collaboration. From the initial planning stages to all preparation, and until now we are at the closing session of this workshop. Finally, I would once again express my gratitude to all of you and hope that we could meet sometimes in the future in different events. Stay healthy, safe, and keep in touch. Thank you and goodbye. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Dr. Sudi Mardian. On behalf of the organizing committee, we would like to extend our sincere thanks to all participants, invited speakers, and moderators for your attendance and contribution during day 1 and day 2 of this workshop, Gap Analysis and Food Loss and Waste Indices. We do understand it might be difficult for some of you to join the workshop virtually. However, we highly appreciate your active participation during this workshop. I am Saad Pasaribu. We are looking forward to the follow-up initiative drawn from these important workshops. With the spirit of togetherness, we recover together, recover stronger. Stay healthy, keep safe, and have a good day. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Masuk.
Yeah. Mana musiknya?